Hello and good afternoon, and thanks for coming, everyone. It's a both pleasure and a challenge for me to introduce Deniz Gündoğan İbrişim. It's a pleasure because she's a good friend of mine and she can be seriously awarded the Best Roommate Ever award because she was a roommate of mine at Los Angeles during a conference, and she definitely deserved that award. But besides joking, it's also a challenge for me to introduce Deniz Gündoğan İbrişim because, as you know, particularly after her PhD, she produced an enormous amount of work which excelled both in quantity and quality. And every time I read Deniz's works or I listen to her talk, I learn a lot. I feel like my brain is expanding or something. So I'll just say a very few things about her works, but if you don't do it by now, do follow her work, listen to her talks, and read what she wrote. You won't regret it, definitely. So Deniz Gündoğan İbrişim is a Marie Curie postdoctoral fellow at Sabancı University, and she completed her PhD in comparative literature from Washington University and St. Louis. And as a comparative literary scholar, she specialized in cultural trauma and memory studies, gender and sexuality studies, post-colonial theory, ecofeminism, and environmental humanities. So together with Sema Kaygusuz, she is also the co-editor of Gaflet, Modern Türkçe Edebiyatın Cinsiyetçi Sinir Uçları, which came out from Metis 4 years ago, where various literary scholars explored the works of major authors in Turkish literature, such as Ahmet Hamdi Tanpınar and Orhan Pamuk, through the gender lens. And Deniz also published her works in major journals such as Intertext, Monograph, Notos, Varlık, and Birikim, as well as in various edited volumes, including the Routledge Companion to Literature and Trauma and Animals, Plants and Landscapes, and Ecology of Turkish Literature and Film, among others, actually. So Deniz is currently working on her monograph on the poetics and politics of ecological witnessing in Anglophone world literatures, which will come out of Routledge Comparative Literature series, which we're looking all forward to reading, of course. And her talk for today is titled Ecofeminist and Animist Constellations of Humanist Inquiry, Emplaced Humanities, where she would explore possibilities of research in the humanities beyond traditional methodological, theoretical, and disciplinary orientations of the modernist era. And she would refer to implications of ecofeminist and animist scholarships in the humanities across a broad interdisciplinary range for discussing what she calls Emplaced Humanities methods, which we're all looking forward to learn more. So I'll give you the floor, Deniz, and thanks for coming. Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Ayşecan, for this very generous introduction. I'm humbled by it, and I'm really very delighted to be here. I know it's such a weird time of the year with so many things going on simultaneously. So thanks so much, everyone, for coming here today virtually. So as Ayşecan mentioned, today I'll be talking about my current research at the nexus of cultural and literary studies, trauma and memory studies, gender and environmental humanities. And I must say that this Emplaced Humanities methods. This talk is a work in progress, which is a part of the working group called Emplaced Humanities Methods at the MLA, Modern Language Associate, MLA Humanities Common. So I'm a part of the working group, and we will be exploring the methodology and pedagogy of Emplaced Humanities at the MLA conference next year, 2024. So this is again a kind of a work in progress, and I'm really looking forward to your comments, your feedback on this. So in this context, I will be discussing the possibilities of humanistic inquiry in an ecofeminist and animist space, while keeping the patterns of exclusion of the sexualized, racialized, and naturalized others that were not recognized as belonging to humanity. My particular attention today will be devoted to perspectives emerging from indigenous and local epistemologies. Additionally, I will be advocating for the efforts to think beyond anthropocentrism by expanding the notion of the homogenized subjectivity and remembrance into an embodied, relational, and effective assembly that enables reciprocal encounters between the human and the non-human, or human and more than human world, inciting an open dialectic where one's sensing body continually responds and adjusts itself to the needs of the other. So I'm interested in questions such as, how do we build spaces for community engagement in physical space and in the digital realm? How can art or literature disrupt the way we see place, where subjectivities are constructed through experiencing, living in, and trading in time and space? More importantly, how the ecofeminist and animist approaches help us move toward a more inclusive understanding of specific sites that can actually tell stories previously ignored or unarticulated. Toward the end of my talk, I will be providing an example from contemporary art in post-colonial African context that rethinks the significance of sense, of place, and require new forms of expression and analysis and new ways of inhabiting the world. The reason that I'm interested in post-colonial African context comes from my own also expertise in post-colonial context. I'm also very much interested in post-colonial theory, post-colonial art and literature, and the way ecofeminism, basically eco-critical thinking and ecofeminism reshape and revises post-colonial thinking today. But I would like to start this talk today with an anecdote, basically. I was contemplating the concept of Emplaced Humanities in a freshman class that I taught during 2021 spring semester amid the lockdowns and everyday pandemic restrictions in the US. Meeting over Zoom, I try to create a safe and inclusive space, letting my students reflect on their own experiences of the pandemic, their different modes of, their different ways of thinking about loss, grief, temporality, as we read fiction that revolved around different forms of psychological and collective trauma from the 20th and 21st century literature. In class, we explore the ways in which contemporary novelists foreground the theme of trauma and incorporate its structures into their writing. For example, accompanied by innovative readings by Toni Morrison, Jean Rhys, Carl Phillips, V.G. Sebald, Orhan Pamuk, Aslı Erdoğan, and so forth. We also considered how novelists in a literature class responded to the challenge of writing traumatic narratives, including catastrophes, epidemics, and pandemics, and identified the key stylistic features associated with the genre called trauma fiction. Of course, we had this class in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic, which of course led to a dramatic loss of human and non-human losses and presented the immense challenge to our own ordinary sense of living, creating uncanny forms of grieving. With this in mind, I used to begin my classes with a 5-minute mindfulness senses exercise, 5 minutes for 5 senses, basically. And now I usually try to include this technique in my own teaching philosophy, in my own classes as well. This mindfulness exercise, in fact, set the tone of the class, and it was especially productive for students in college and university levels, where campus life was no longer available for them in the midst of the pandemic. It helped calm a busy and restless mind, and to an extent reduce the pandemic stress and bring our own awareness to the now and to the course content. The exercise was quite simple. Even though we were not able to meet all together in a physical classroom setting, all we had to do on Zoom was close our eyes, think of or focus on, first, 5 things we could see that we normally wouldn't care to see. Second, 4 things we could touch we normally wouldn't care to touch. 3 things we would hear that we normally wouldn't care to hear. 2 things we can smell that we normally wouldn't care to smell. And the last one was 1 thing we can taste that we normally wouldn't care to taste. So this mini exercise helped my students ground themselves when feeling really uncomfortable and develop the common language among me as their professor and them, and as well as prepare our minds to stay present. It also allowed me to know what's going on in my own classroom with my students, which was also critical to my ability to orchestrate the social, emotional, and environmental dynamics of the physical, or in this context, virtual spaces that are conducive to learning. But more importantly, this mindfulness exercise encouraged students to think the transformation of the boundary between mind and body, nature and culture, or even broader, between the non-human and the human, as they aligned themselves with the project of driving interaction with the non-human counterparts, including maybe animals beside them, objects, plants, and matter all around them, surrounding them. I think through this exercise, we try to develop the capacity to turn towards suffering, our own suffering and the suffering of others, seeing these two as linked and in place, I would say. Through the effects of our own actions and senses on others, and through awareness of our own fundamental interbeing, always in touch or in contact with the other, we aimed at thinking humanities in a literature class based in pluralism, hopefully struggle and relationality. This class I taught 2 years ago proved to be a catalyst for me in thinking that universities, and in particular humanities courses, must be responsive to local and situated knowledge. Thus, my contemplation on what I want to call Emplaced Humanities today would encourage students, teachers, scholars, activists, artists, and practitioners to engage from where they are, the places they live, they have lived, or they have left behind, while always recognizing that our histories have necessarily made our cohabitations inharmonious and thus subject to reformation. But this class, it was so informative and really a kind of a paradigm changing experience for me along my students. This class also led me to focus more on materialistic understandings of the embodied and environmentally embedded self, refusing nature culture, mind body binary, as well as provide critical reflections on the ethics of doing research about Emplaced Humanities, which can, I argue, can be best found and furthered by ecofeminist and animist perspectives. Indeed, surprisingly, one of my students explicitly told me that what we did was an ecofeminist gesture toward a more effective and materialistic mode of being in this world, grounded in this world. So in what follows, I know maybe you're all familiar about ecofeminism, methodologies, pedagogies, and in fact, by saying ecofeminism, maybe we should also underline that as with the case of feminism, there are many different forms of ecofeminism. So maybe I should also underline the plurality of ecofeminism here. So a very brief background maybe on ecofeminism will be helpful here. Over the years, many feminists have shied away from the concept of ecofeminism, a sub-movement that began in the 1970s and received a boost from Carolyn Merchant's The Death of Nature, Women, Ecology, and the Scientific Revolution, published in 1980s. Critiques of ecofeminism have really varied. They include the perception that ecofeminists have historically focused more on spiritual and material solutions to the environmental crisis. In addition, white ecofeminists were charged with essentializing women and paying too little attention to the many differences of race, for example, class, sexuality, and cultural perspectives. In particular, they fail to recognize this different impact of environmental degradation on women of color, basically, in impoverished regions and communities, and conversely ignore the positive effects of marginalized women's ways of life, preserving the health of the biosphere. Moreover, some feminists worry that any association of women with nature, including ecofeminist arguments about their linked exploitation, because ecofeminism sees the basic line of oppression of nature and oppression and suppression of women, they are so closely intertwined. But it would not only obscure many women's life experiences, especially those of non-heterosexual women, but also reinforce damaging social constructions of women identities that would also impede feminist progress. So again, there are many lines, there are some conflicting lines inside ecofeminist methodologies and theories. But as the environmental crisis has worsened and the catastrophic social and environmental effects of the era called the Anthropocene, the Capitalocene, or Plantocene have cascaded today, attention to ecofeminist concepts is now enjoying a revival, we could say. These crises have made it increasingly apparent that the violation of interdependence of natural systems that characterize the geochemical transformation of the earth through human activity are indeed gendered. In the broader sense, Greta Gard writes, I quote from her, ecofeminism is a theory that has evolved from various fields of feminist inquiry and activism, peace movements, labor movements, women's healthcare, and the anti-nuclear, environmental, and animal liberation movements. Drawing on the insights of ecology, feminism, socialism, ecofeminism, basic premise is that the ideology which authorizes oppressions such as those based on race, class, gender, sexuality, physical abilities, and species is the same ideology which sanctions the oppression of nature. So again, intersectionality, the intertwined nature of different forms of oppression is quite visible in an ecofeminist understanding. The critical discourse on ecofeminism then not only includes the scholarly intervention of feminist understandings of the accommodation of women, marginalized others, and more than human nature, with an emphasis on ecological aims. It also refers to diversity, injustice, and inequalities along the various intersecting lines of web of oppression. It considers the intersections between gender, race, class, species, and other organizing relations of the life on Earth as they are closely, as I mentioned, intertwined within society and our planet. I think such a really very powerful and inspiring analysis can be best found in Val Plumwood, one of the pioneers of ecofeminist philosophy. Plumwood argues that anthropocentrism as a value system rests on the assumption that there is a deep division between humanity and nature, between mind and matter, which becomes refined in the Western tradition into an opposition between, of course, reason and nature. In particular, her seminal work toward a philosophical animism, which took inspiration from animist indigenous people while seeking to discern wisdom and intelligence in material world. And maybe I should open a very brief small parenthesis because it's a huge topic. But in general, animism was a term ethnocentrically promoted by E.B. Tyler in Primitive Culture to describe primitive religion as worshipping spirits and to stigmatize the so-called primitive people, the African, of course. But the fallacy of this hasty universalization and general misconception about African thought was profoundly challenged by Harry Garuba, one of the very important animist scholar. In his seminal work, Explorations in Animist Materialism, Notes on Reading, Writing African Literature, Culture, and Society, Garuba develops the idea of animist thought as a system that spiritualizes physical objects, all objects around us, all so-called non-human entities around us. Again, they have their own will, they have their own spirit, and Garuba argues that this is a continual re-enchantment of the world. Garuba theorizes that an animist understanding of the world applied to practices of everyday life could provide novel avenues of agency for the dispossessed in colonial and post-colonial Africa. In a similar gesture, Plumwood also, I think, provides an analysis of how the division between human and animal, nature and culture, mind and body had historically been constructed, and how this sort of division informs many other categories of Western thought. More importantly, I think, again, Plumwood underscores how this binary system renders inferior all of the terms that are associated with nature rather than reason, including the working class, the colonized, the indigenous woman, LGBTQ people, as well as the more than human world. According to Plumwood, excluding multiple others in order to create the master's identity, that is colonization, of course, lies at the heart of Western culture, and this seems most prevalent in its conception of absolute reason with regard to the white, wealthy European masculine human subject. The logic of colonization then is based on a hyper-separation of the superior and the inferior, such as man, woman, human nature, white, black, master, slave, God, world, reason, emotion, public, private, and I think we can also stretch this list. For Plumwood, dualisms have been the major forms of oppression in Western thought, as they are closely tied with subjugated social and ecological beings and groups. So Plumwood's ecofeminism then critically addresses the logic of colonization, which justifies the domination of man over woman, human over nature, and all other intersecting oppressions, foregrounding a very powerful analytical framework that expands and challenges dominant forces and modes of power and oppression. In particular, Plumwood develops, in fact, her ecofeminism within the activist struggle. This is a very important feature, again, that should be underlined. Her ecofeminism is obviously radical in the sense that it establishes both subversion and resistance from an individual and collective perspective. She reflects on two personal, very intimate encounters with death, first being seized as prey by a crocodile, and burying her son in a country cemetery with a flourishing botanic community. Here she challenges the human exceptionalism, which sets humans as categorically or essentially different than all other animals and non-human living beings. This also expands the reductive materialistic conception in which death marks the absolute end of life and itself. Again, it is very much aligned with the African animism, seeing that not as an absolute closure, but just opposite, kind of a very open-ended, a kind of a very, vibrant possibility toward other forms of relating to the all other forms of subjecthood or establishing subjecthood. In this way, her understanding of animism rests on the recognition that the world is full of living beings, only some of them who are human, and that life is always lived in a cyclical relationship with others, as opposed to the progressive, linear, and modernist notion of time, aligned, of course, with the Enlightenment thought. Plumwood recognizes personhood from other subject positions, especially from Aboriginal and Indigenous thought. She was an Australian philosopher, and she was so interested in this Aboriginal thought and Indigenous knowledge making and meaning making in that specific context. So she built her ecofeminism from the thought where nature has never been viewed from the objectivation of the colonial gaze. Instead, her ecofeminist and animist materialistic approach involves non-human beings, material objects, and matter, which are coded with social and spiritual meaning, as opposed to the Cartesian view of nature as blank, mere background to human thinking and action. At the same time, this approach, of course, resists to colonial modernity's time, imposed as very linear, progressive, and temporal order. One can really distinguish a very close link between Plumwood animistic approach and African ecofeminists, including Wangari Maathai, Zimbabwean scholar activist Tumani Muta, who offer African ecofeminist praxis that is informed by pre-colonial Africa for forging non-hierarchical and harmonious relationship between humans and non-humans, as well as the earth as a whole. While pre-colonial African customs and traditions sustain balance between humans and the earth, they also provide a spiritual base for communication between the human and nature, the living and the dead, beyond the Eurocentric interpretation of the boundary between nature and culture, or even the broader between human and the non-human. We are not, of course, imposing a kind of a binary thought between modernity and after modernism and after modernism, postmodernism, but also we should be able to think how pre-colonial thought, images, metaphors, or knowledge making can really provide some genuine information on ecofeminism and animist mode of thought. Ecofeminist philosophy and animist materials approach, then I argue, holds a particular significance in expanding and challenging modernity's linear time, which is attendant of Cartesian divide between the human eye and the world. But more specifically, ecofeminist philosophy, particularly here inspired by Plumwood and African animism, here they are poised to recast the relationship between modernity and tradition, memory and desire, past and future, in a manner that necessitates recalibration of the humanities research and humanities work from the combined perspectives of mind, nature, society, place, and culture. That's why I want to again go back to my opening anecdote. That mini mindfulness senses exercise also provide the basis of understanding humanistic research, or understanding the way we maybe discuss literature in a literature course, on the way that previously articulated or ignored some kind of threats like that. I would like to continue now my talk by discussing one of the very strongest and contemporary South African poets and artists, Koleka Putama's contemporary art, including poetry and public art. I argue that her work urges us to rethink humanities work, in particular literature work. Of course, I am also limiting my options here, within the broader framework of Emplaced Humanities informed by ecofeminism. Koleka Putama is a South African poet and theater artist. She calls herself as a theater artist who graduated with a BA in theater and performance at the University of Cape Town. She has headlined at TEDx talks recently. Her work has been showcased in Scotland, Germany, and around the US. And she has been named one of Africa's top 10 poets. And now she is considered as one of the young pioneers who took South Africa by storm with her work, with her activism, with her ecofeminist stance. Putama wrote a poem when she was a student at the University of Cape Town, when she took poetry and drama courses, when she was only 19 years old. With her poem Water, written specifically in that literature course, she won the Pan-South African Student Writing Prize in 2016. Water is a very powerful piece, which I will also discuss in a minute, addresses slave trade in South Africa and was written as a response to conversations that Putama herself was having with her friends and teachers about student movements, the meaning of water for Black people, and what it means to be Black in South Africa in a contemporary setting as a life thing. It's a very long poem. It consists of maybe 3 or 4 long pages. So I only want to quote a short section here, but I will also provide you hopefully the whole poem through chat. Let me see my now technological skills again. Hope I can make it. Okay. I just sent the whole poem Water in a Word document on chat, so you could also have a copy. Again, it's a very long and moving poem, but I quote here a very small part of it. The poem begins with the lines, I quote, "The memory of going to the beach every New Year's Eve is one I share with cousins and most people raised Black. How the elders would forbid us from going into too deep, to giggle, to splash in our black tights, and ShopRite plastic bags wrapped around our knee weaves, forbid us from riding the wave." And it continues as follows, I quote, "Every time our skin goes under, it is as if the reeds remember they were once chains, and the water, restless, wishes it could spew all of the slaves and ships onto shore. Whole as they had bordered, sailed and sunk, their tears are what we have turned the ocean salty. This is why our irises burn every time we go under. Every December 16th, December 24th, December 31st, our skin re-traumatizes the sea. They mock us for not being able to willingly throw ourselves into something that was instrumental in trying to execute our extinction. For you, the ocean is for surfboards, boats, and tents, and all the funky stuff you do under there in your bathing suits and goggles. But we have come to be baptized here. We have come to stir the other world here. We have come to cleanse ourselves here. We have come to connect our living to the dead here." End quote. I wish I could do justice with my reading, so please excuse my poor reading and poor, tone. However, Water as a memory work, I would say here, accuses colonizer of using water to facilitate their agenda. The poet persona here pleads for water to be restored as a site of Black women memory and as an archive for Black people. The poem beauty lies in how it emphasizes water as an important conduit in Black thought and local knowledge. Water here as a non-human entity has its own complex interrelationship, entanglements, and of course, propensities for an open-ended change. Most of the time, we think of nature and object as passive and stable things, and we human as the very, heroic, active subjects in the world. Water and reeds here want to dissolve this binary between subject and object, showing how water has the capacity to animate, to act, to produce effects dramatic and subtle. In water, the historical trauma relates to the ocean as a root of slavery and colonialism. And water becomes, I argue, as an ecofeminist and vibrant space in which other versions of events can be reimagined. And more significantly, water reveals ecofeminist insights that recognize the complex embeddedness of different temporalities, different discursive formations, and women subject positions, and of course, different epistemological perspectives within the same historical moment. Putama, very interestingly, turns this poem into a public video art, bringing together both poem and performance, sense and space, and sense and place. She creates an audiovisual poetry and manifests that the daily practices can contribute largely to social changes, just like in the public domain. In this way, I would want to call her work as an in-place work, initially originated in a literature course at the University of Cape Town, and now encouraging us to think of the specific matter and sites in a more nuanced way, with an ecofeminist reinterpretation of the conventional way of meaning making and politics. I would like to show a very short clip of this video, and I would like to share this if I have still time. Let me see.
I think you'll do share screen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hopefully I will now click on.
Yeah.
Deniz, did you click on share sound while you are sharing?
There is no sound, Deniz, so you should also do click sound, share sound. Deniz, I think you stopped sharing.
Yes, I stopped sharing.
Okay.
Share once more. Yes.
For the sound, okay.
It should automatically come, but I'm not sure. Let's see. Yes, share screen.
Every New Year's Eve
Can you hear it now?
is one I share with cousins, and most people raised Black. How the elders would forbid us from going in too deep, to giggle, to splash in our black tights and ShopRite plastic bags wrapped around our new weaves, forbid us from riding the wave for fear that we would be a mass of blackness swept by the tide and never to return like litter. The elders forbid us as if the ocean has food poisoning. I often wonder why I feel as if I am drowning every time I look out into the sea. This and feeling incredibly small. And I have often heard this joke about Black people being scared of water or not being able to swim. We are mocked, and we have often mocked ourselves for wiping our faces the way that we do when we come out of water, compared to how they do it all Baywatch-like, and how we so ratchet-like with our postures and kink. Every time our skin goes under, it's as if the reeds remember that they were once chains, and the water, restless, wishes that it could spew all the slaves and ships onto shore, whole as they had boarded, sailed, and sunk. Their tears are what have turned the ocean salty. This is why our irises burn every time we go under. Every December 16th, December 24th, December 31st, our skin re-traumatizes the sea. They mock us for not being able to willingly throw ourselves into something that was instrumental in trying to execute our extinction. For you, the ocean is for surfboards, boats, tans, and all the funky stuff you do under there in your bathing suits and goggles. But we have come to be baptized here. We have come to stir the other world here. We have come to connect our living to the dead here. Our respect for water is what you have termed fear. The audacity to trade and murder us over water, then mock us for being scared of it. The audacity to arrive by water and invade us.
Okay, I stopped sharing. But I think you slightly get the idea, and she is Koleka Putama herself, performing the piece. Yeah, I will just leave it to your comments in Q&A section. But my last concluding remarks would be, as seen, the video opens with Putama sitting on a rocky rock by the sea, with the sound of seagulls flying overhead and blue waves crashing against gray stone. Putama uses her words and her voice, but also her body, as you already realize. She touches water, smells water, floats with water, and she is water herself, in fact, reclaiming her history, in which the tragic influence of historical events on the present can be explored. Lastly, if not that far-fetched, the way Putama engaged with water, competing, forming alliances, initiating new processes, dramatically reminds us of Cape Town's Day Zero water crisis, the point when the water level at dams north of the city falls to 13%, forcing the adoption of emergency rationing, and thus Cape Town massive drought between 2015 and 2017. This video also focuses attention on our dependency on water and the environmental degradation in South Africa in the Anthropocene. Of course, one can also say that Putama's real concern was not the environmental degradation in South Africa in the Anthropocene, but thinking of water as a very effective and embodied witness figure, so to speak, thinking of water as a memory, as an archive. Again, it relates to other novel reimaginings of water and the environmental degradation as a whole in our planet. So this audiovisual poem, let's call it, can be seen as an in-place strategy on how to ethically inhabit, articulate, and theorize our place in this world. It also accommodates very different ways we are located within global ecological, economic, technological, and social networks. Thank you so much for your patience, and thank you so much for listening. I will end here.
Thank you so much, Deniz, for this really interesting and touching talk. You know, I felt so many things while listening, and I'm sure I'm not alone. And you made me think about so many different issues again. But of course, I'm not going to dominate the Q&A. So I'm now asking you guys whether there's any questions, comments that you want to bring forth. I think we need some time to digest what you spoke about.
I know it's a very long, trajectory from ecofeminism, some sort of historical and background, contested histories, contested stories of ecofeminism. But I really wanted to show the way we can reshape our pedagogies. We can reshape the way we think in classroom and beyond classroom, in fact. The reason that I selected Putama was she literally produced this work of art due to her rage in a literature course, due to her anger with her professors, white professors, basically, quotation mark, rage in the humanities literature course. And then now she's one of the stars. She's a very well-known figure, an activist, even though I think she's now maybe 23 or 24 years old. So it's a long trajectory, but maybe this can also, offer or provide some other new pedagogies, some other new methodologies for us to do humanities work. Basically, it's a work in progress. So still, I'm trying to figure it out the way we can expand our methodologies and normative pedagogies in classroom and beyond classroom, in academia and beyond academia.
Maybe I can start by asking very basic question. While listening to you, I was just thinking of recent Turkish history and the traumas in it. And I was wondering whether we can have any, pedagogy in the classrooms in Turkish university through the lens of Emplaced Humanities, how we can approach these issues like ecofeminisms, animisms, and so on, which we have, although it's different from the context you spoke about, we have, let's say, different counterparts of these issues. So can you give examples, or did you ever think about these issues on how to study it? In terms of like Turkish literature, or literatures of Turkey,
Exactly, yes, and it's a complex issue of its own. But for example, when I teach Turkish literature or literatures of Turkey, for example, and when I teach a novel about the Anthropocene and the novel, or the climate crisis in Turkish literature and so on, I try to really ground ourselves in that specific site. That's knowledge coming from the sense of place is, I think, quite important. So, for example, if we read, I'm just giving an example, but if you read, for example, Kara Kitap, The Black Book by Orhan Pamuk, there is a very famous episode on the Bosphorus, kind of a dystopian, very bleak picture of Bosphorus. Under Bosphorus, there are many, many objects, so-called inanimate objects, but they have their own histories, they have their own will, so to speak. For example, we might go to Bosphorus and we might, for example, contemplate on the novel or ask questions about the history of Bosphorus, or thinking of Bosphorus, thinking of Marmara Sea as a very effective archive, maybe on site. So this came up like a kind of a strategy. And in fact, Sabancı does this brilliantly with curious steps. This kind of model, or curious seeds now with the expansion of ecological outlets. So I think the sense of place, sense of space, and the idea of planetarity, idea thinking that this planet is our home, our own habitat, maybe could be a sort of an expansion.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Aslı. Thank you so much, Deniz.
Of course. Oh, it's a decent answer, hopefully, because I'm still, thinking about how to expand and challenge it.
Aslı?
Thanks, Deniz. I'll follow up a bit on Ayşecan's point. While listening to the poem, I just remembered this recent announcement of an exhibition at Depot about the Munzur River and what it means for the Munzur identity. So the water, the mountain, the fish, and the goats, etc. So like Ayşecan was saying, there are probably very many parallels to be drawn between, different Turkish sites and these, worldwide sites that you were talking about. But I have a different question. I was wondering how Emplaced Humanities would speak to displacement, because we live in an age where people are constantly uprooted, constantly displaced, and struggling to take root or make homes in their in the new places that they found themselves. So yeah, how does Emplaced Humanities speak to displacement is my question. Thank you.
Thanks so much for this great question. It's a very, very important question, I think. Before maybe trying to say something on it, I recently saw that exhibition at Depot. You should, if anyone still, you should really definitely see it. And it really speaks to the importance of forms of local knowledge, and how that, the embeddedness and embodied knowledge or situatedness really affects the way we think about nature, the way we think about humanity, and so on. Sometimes there can be a big discrepancy between scholars and thinkers placed at prestigious universities, and the very activist work being done on that specific site. So I think that sort of, for example, exhibitions could be could serve as a kind of a bridge uniting these sort of the discrepancies. In terms of displacement, I think Emplaced Humanities, which we are trying to contemplate on, will be crucial in the sense that thinking of specific sites that were ignored and unarticulated, that were erased from the official histories. So what maybe Emplaced Humanities would offer again to create and offer counter archive, for example, in relation to temporality and speciality, it's again a kind of a work memory. I would say that it's a memory work, creating a sort of memory that was previously unclaimed. So we are claiming that territory, or we are claiming that sort of ignored or silent memories, and thinking about the very specificity of being grounded in one place, thinking of being I'm thinking of, for example, again, I'm working in that context. That's why I'm thinking of, for example, Nigeria, South Africa, Sudan. There are many places of displacement in terms of political displacement, in terms of now climate displacement. There are climate refugees and so on. But what does it mean to have that sort of land, dissipated, dilapidated, and out of context? What happens to land itself? What kind of memory when you go back to that land, when you listen to the more than human stories, when you listen to the land itself, when you listen to the actual rivers, trees, and so on? What happens to that land actually? So I think going to that kind of displaced lands, or thinking about displacement, I think it will inform the way we think about memory, which memories are erased, which memories are included, to what extent, and so on. So I think I'm always looking at from a kind of a memory perspective, and I think when you think about Emplaced Humanities, and when you think about different forms and different intersecting types of displacement, I think it will tell us more nuanced stories about whose memories are we talking about, which objects or subjects are we talking about. I know it's a long route, a long answer, but yeah.
Thank you, Deniz. Ivana?
Hi,
Hello?
Deniz.
Hi, Ivana.
I hope you remember that we did that panel on indigenous poetics and epistemologies.
Yeah, thank you for coming. I just remember now.
This was so exciting to see. It was a wonderful talk. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
So I guess I wanted to ask you, because we're both interested in African literature, and I work on another Zimbabwean writer, Yvonne Vera, and I'm also interested in the memory of land and the agency of the non-human. And there's a lot now happening in African and post-colonial studies with the agency of the non-human, but a lot of it seems to be going through that new materialist kind of perspective. And the idea of indigenous epistemology still sits pretty uneasily with a lot of post-colonial scholars. So I'm wondering, how do you situate yourself in relation to that kind of work, like that special issue of the Journal of the Cambridge Journal of Postcolonial Literary Inquiry on hydrocolonialism, which talks all about the agency of water, but really not in the way that you are. So how do people react? How do you situate yourself in relation to it? And where do you see your work changing the way that literary texts are discussed, like modernist poetics? How does reading through an animist lens change the reading of these texts? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ivana, for this great question. And it's really lovely to see you again. I must admit something. During my PhD studies, while I was writing my dissertation on trauma and memory and trying to see culture, trauma, and memory studies from a post-humanist and new materialistic sense. But at some point, I was really discomforted with myself that I was using, new materialistic, post-humanistic theories that was also emerging from the West, if I may say quotation. So I thought that, trying to pull animism, trying to pull even, other marginalized or ignored beliefs, so-called non-secular, into this discourse would expand and challenge that Eurocentric and Western-oriented framework. So that's why I think I changed my, direction to this sort of inquiry, especially in trauma fiction and trauma literature, while we are talking about traumatic experiences. But whose traumatic experience are we really talking about? So I try to incorporate the, more than human world as a, very active, vibrant actor in coping, in bearing witness to trauma and also aftermath of trauma and coping with certain traumatic experiences. But I think nowadays there are many also exciting works. For example, if I remember correctly, there was this special issue in Angelaki, Beyond the Human Witness. And that special issue also included really good literature coming from, again, Nigeria, coming from post-colonial context, with an emphasis on, for example, more indigenous and local knowledge making and meaning making. So there are some, exciting works in relation to, again, memory and trauma studies. But in general, I think the whole, trajectory still is aligned with new materialistic and post-humanistic framework coming from Rosie Braidotti or coming from other, very esteemed and well-respected scholars. I don't dismiss them. I use them in my own work, but also I try to challenge them. For example, I am also working with modern Turkish literature, and in modern Turkish literature, we have an immense work on Anatolia. And we have an immense work of Anatolian animistic perspectives, or trying to think of animism from the context of the global Middle East. So there are, again, different perspectives and different outlets that I'm trying to integrate in my own work. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, absolutely. Fantastic. We should talk later.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Same here, definitely. I realize how much I missed talking to you, Deniz, about especially these issues. Any other questions, comments?
I just want to thank Deniz. I'm also working on my PhD, and following her work really inspires me, and really helpful. And here you started talking about your COVID-19 class and talked about how mindfulness added up to your, a class of Atlas player. And when you shared the video of Ptuma, it was like a mindfulness, right? It was like a session Ptuma was doing, but also kind of experimenting with it. I really like it. I have so many questions, and I also work on Poisonwood Bible, Barbara Kingslaughter. So many sections from the novel, give me spark for thought. Thank you very much. It's inspiring, really.
Thanks so much, Eileen. It's really great to hear them. These are from you, actually. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Well, thank you so much, Deniz'im, for this great talk. We'll definitely upload and share it with on the Sugender page as well. So I hope many people can listen to you and can learn from you as well, like us. And thanks all for participation and for your comments and questions. And yeah, I'll join Sonarjam as well in applauding you, definitely. And so I wish you a good night wherever you are, and so have a good day. And good luck to you for your book, Deniz'cim, especially, and for your other projects. Okay, thank you very much, and bye for now. Bye. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks Deniz. Bye bye.
Görüşürüz. Hoşçakalın. Çok sağ ol Deniz'cim. Harikaydı yine.
Ben çok teşekkür ederim. Görüşürüz.
Görüşürüz. Hoşçakal.